It was a day of celebration that turned into the most horrific nightmare a father could ever endure. July 1992. Universal Studios, Hollywood, California. Two Chinese-American twin boys, Logan and Lucas Chen, 11 years old, vanished mysteriously after taking a photo with Frankenstein, one of the iconic costumed characters in the classic Monsters area. Their father had only looked away for 7 minutes to buy water, and when he returned, his sons were gone, as if swallowed by the earth. What really happened that day at one of America's most famous amusement parks? Why did the investigation fail completely? How could two boys disappear without a trace in a tightly controlled, camera-filled environment like Universal? 31 years later, during a renovation of an abandoned prop warehouse, workers discovered a rotting backpack hanging on a wooden beam. Inside were chilling clues, revealing a truth more horrific than anyone could imagine. A scribbled plea for help, a discontinued Universal souvenir from 1992, and a piece of red fabric with a cut mark. This was the start of an investigation that unraveled one of the coldest cases in Universal Studios history, where childhood memories became a haunting shadow over 3 decades. Be sure to subscribe to the channel to not miss cases like this, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. July 17, 1992, was supposed to be a perfect day to celebrate. The twins, Logan and Lucas Chen, had just turned 11, and their father, Daniel Chen, had planned for months to give them a special gift. A trip to Universal Studios Hollywood, a place the boys had dreamed of since first grade. Their family had moved to California from New Jersey after the sudden death of Daniel's wife, the boys' mother, in a car accident in 1987. Daniel raised the boys alone, working at a print shop in El Monte, taking on night shifts cleaning warehouses, and cutting every expense to save for this trip. Logan was the outgoing one, always telling stories and making people laugh, while Lucas was calmer, asking questions that left adults stunned by their depth. They were identical. Neatly trimmed black hair, almond eyes, and a sly smile, as if hiding a mischievous joke, but a short conversation could tell them apart. That morning, Daniel woke them at 5 a.m., packed peanut butter sandwiches in a bag, and they set off in their old Toyota Corolla. They arrived at Universal's gates at 8:45 a.m., amid a sea of people and the spinning silver globe. Logan and Lucas wore ET t-shirts, denim shorts, and red backpacks their father had bought on sale at Target. Daniel carried a Kodak 35mm camera with fresh batteries and a loaded film roll. When the gates opened, the three stepped into a world of sound, light, and cinematic dreams. Streets mimicking New York film sets, the Terminator tram, explosions in backdraft, a giant mechanical shark rising from a lake, and children's laughter echoing from every ride. Daniel captured every moment, from Logan's beaming smile at the sight of the DeLorean, from Back to the Future to Lucas's furrowed brow, as he studied the map and optimized their route to avoid crowds. They ate lunch, hot dogs and soda, under a tree near the Waterworld stage. Around 2:45 p.m., Logan spotted Frankenstein, his favorite character from old black and white VHS tapes, standing near a photo area. "Dad, it's him. Can we take a picture?" Logan tugged at his father's arm, and Lucas, though hesitant, nodded. Daniel raised the camera, snapping 1, 2, 3 shots, as Frankenstein put his arms around the boys, his wrinkled mask, and slow, friendly gestures reassuring. A staff member nearby suggested Daniel visit a nearby drink stand for discount coupons. Daniel checked his watch, still early, and left the boys, saying, "Stay right here, don't go anywhere. I'll be right back." Frankenstein nodded, as if to reassure him. Daniel walked quickly to the stand, less than 100 meters away. 7 minutes later, he returned. The spot where he'd left his sons was empty. No Logan, no Lucas, no Frankenstein. At first he thought they were just wandering nearby, but minutes of fruitless searching turned his worry into panic. He shouted their names, ran through pathways, asked every person, every employee. A Mexican mother helped him alert security. Universal staff immediately shut down the classic Monsters area, radioing across the park, but no one found any trace. Logan and Lucas had vanished, as if they'd never existed, amid thousands of people, under golden sunlight, on a birthday meant to be filled with laughter. No one screamed. No one called out. No shoes were left behind. No pleas or evidence were abandoned. Just an eerie void where a moment should have been captured on Kodak film. A security officer led Daniel to a guest services office, air-conditioned and lined with park maps. He didn't sit. He stood frozen, hands gripping the camera strap, staring into space as if afraid that blinking would make everything disappear forever. A female staff member asked, "Did you take photos of the boys before they went missing?" He nodded, pulling the Kodak film roll from his pocket. It was the only proof, a fragment of the past preserved on celluloid. Los Angeles police arrived at 4:15 p.m. Two officers, Wilson, young, and Martinez, older, began questioning. Daniel recounted every detail, the boys in ET shirts, red backpacks, Frankenstein standing there, waving to him, signaling he'd watch the kids for a few minutes. He'd only gone to the drink stand across from the ride area. 7 minutes. No more, Martinez asked sternly. "Do you remember the face of the person in costume?" Daniel shook his head. "No. He wore a mask. I just remember he was tall, walked with a slight limp." Strangely, this matched another witness's account, a German woman at the Classic Monsters area. She said she saw two boys taking photos with Frankenstein, who walked with a slight limp, his hands moving slower than normal. But that was all. No one saw them leave. No one saw Frankenstein leave the area. Universal Studios confirmed no one was scheduled to perform as Frankenstein in that area at that time. The staff management system logged performers' roles by specific time slots, and the Classic Monsters area was supposed to have no activity after 2:30 p.m. So who was that man, and why was he there, dressed as Frankenstein, approaching the boys and vanishing without a trace? The park's cameras, mostly positioned at entrances, restaurants, and main areas, captured no clear footage of the boys' movements between 3 o'clock and 3:30 p.m. One camera near the Fast and Furious entrance showed a brief glimpse of two small figures near Frankenstein, but only for a few seconds before they were obscured by a group of tourists. No one saw them leave the park. No witnesses reported anything. No unusual sounds were heard. No one heard them scream. Logan and Lucas seemed to have evaporated in an open park, filled with people, under warm sunlight, and the innocent imagination of thousands of children. Police sealed off the area, searched every restroom, every corner. They checked every trash can, opened every technical door, and called the boys' names over loudspeakers for hours. The park remained open to guests, but staff quietly passed around photos from Daniel's camera. Images of the boys with Frankenstein, one showing Lucas holding his brother's hand. A security manager whispered, "This has never happened." Martinez questioned Daniel a second time. Though treated as a witness, police had to consider all possibilities, including that he caused the disappearance. But Daniel was near collapse. His voice was hoarse. "Do you have kids?" he asked Martinez, not waiting for an answer. "I just went to buy 2 bottles of water. Just 7 minutes." He slumped, not crying, his eyes wide open, as if closing them would erase the image of his boys forever. By 10 p.m., police expanded the search beyond the park. Highways, rest stops, and public restrooms nearby were checked. Cars leaving Universal's parking lot were randomly inspected. Nothing was found. No ransom demands came. No anonymous calls. No sign this was a kidnapping for money. As night fell over Hollywood, for Daniel, it was the start of a darkness that would last over 3 decades. A darkness without a name, without meaning, without explanation. Just a void where his 2 sons once existed, and where a father's heart was torn apart, unnoticed by the world. As Universal Studios' dazzling nightlights dimmed, and the last guests left the main gate in silence, the entire Classic Monsters area was sealed off. A temporary sign was hastily hung, "Area closed for technical maintenance." It was the management's attempt to hide the truth from the public. But inside, amid what was once a maze of lights, fog, and artificial roars, there was a suffocating silence. Police, local FBI, and internal security searched every backstage door, every technical wall crevice, every heating duct beneath the stages. But all efforts were futile. Logan and Lucas Chen left no trace, no blood, no clues, no shoe prints, no screams. Nothing. A case file was opened the next morning, numbered UHO 1990-20717, titled, "Unresolved Missing Persons, 2 Minors, Suspected Abduction," inside Universal Studios. Strangely, the file wasn't widely publicized at first. Universal Studios, with its massive legal and PR teams, controlled information leaks. Spokespeople refused interviews and declined to provide lists of employees who played costumed characters on July 17. Their reason: privacy and safety concerns. Meanwhile, Daniel Chen was engulfed in a whirlwind of cold legal processes and media indifference. He was allowed to return home after 2 days of relentless questioning in a near catatonic state. The single father, once living by a meticulous schedule, now had nowhere to return to. The El Monte apartment still had 2 small twin beds, unmade. On the wall was a watercolor painting Logan gave him for Father's Day, with scrawled words, "Dad is my superhero." Days later, the media caught wind. A brief story appeared on an inside page of the Los Angeles Daily, overshadowed by summer festival coverage and new movie releases. Within 2 weeks, the disappearance faded from the news entirely. Los Angeles police continued investigating, but found no leads. What made the case more hopeless was Universal's organized chaos. Unlike a neighborhood where strangers stand out, Universal was a true entertainment hell, thousands of people coming and going daily, costumed staff rotating constantly. Cameras in the early 90s capturing only fixed points in low resolution. Surveillance tapes were stored on VHS and overwritten after 48 hours. By the time the FBI joined on the 3rd day, nearly all relevant footage was gone. Worse, the staff schedule for that day was poorly documented. Costumed performers signed a costume appearance and shift logbook, but it was still handwritten. No one was logged as playing Frankenstein between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m. on July 17. At 11 a.m. that day, a man named Edward Lawton was recorded as the only Frankenstein performer. But he ended his shift at 1:15 p.m. and was verified to be in the HR office during the incident, confirmed by 2 others. Police formed a theory: the kidnapper infiltrated backstage, took an official Frankenstein costume, disguised themselves, approached the boys, and led them out through a technical exit known only to insiders. But who was it? A former employee? Someone who once worked there? Or someone who had been watching the boys beforehand? Logan and Lucas were added to the National Missing Children's List on July 21, 1992. The Amber Alert system didn't exist then. It wasn't implemented until 1996 in Texas, so the information wasn't automatically broadcast on radio or TV. Daniel printed flyers himself. Hunched over a small dining table, he cut and pasted photos of his sons, writing, 11 years old, twins, missing at Universal Studios, please contact with any information. He posted them at gas stations, bus stops, Asian grocery stores, laundromats, even slipping them into free newspaper boxes in Koreatown and Monterey Park. But no one called, not one phone call, not one lead. 6 months later, the case was marked inactive. A young officer wrote an internal report, no evidence strong enough to confirm the children were harmed, abducted, or left voluntarily. Status: unresolved missing. Daniel disagreed. He refused to sign the case closure form. He kept calling the police hotline weekly, monthly. He returned to Universal every year on the boy's birthday, sitting on a bench near the now removed Classic Monsters area, replaced by the lively Minion Zone. Each time, he brought the old Kodak roll, the final photo, the boys with Frankenstein, smiling innocently, their clear eyes unaware they had only minutes left in this world. For decades, the disappearance of Logan and Lucas Chen became a scar buried under the glitter of entertainment, amid the laughter echoing in Universal's fabricated world, where everything existed except the truth. 10 years later, the Classic Monsters area was fully dismantled, replaced by modern-themed restaurants. The Frankenstein, Dracula, and Wolfman statues were quietly removed. No one mentioned the disappearance, not a single line was recorded in official news. That's how Universal folded away its darker chapters, like a reel of film with scenes cut out. But for Daniel Chen, it never ended. He stayed in the old El Monte apartment, despite advice to move and start over. 2 hooks on the wall, where the red backpacks once hung, were never removed. He hadn't bought a new backpack since that day. He kept the Target receipt for the old ones, tucked in a drawer with photos of his sons. Once a month, he went to Universal, not to blame, but to wait. Sometimes he stood silently for hours outside the backstage entrance, holding the old photo, hoping someone would stop and say something. No one ever did. Some said he was obsessed. Others suggested therapy. But how do you heal an emptiness when part of your body has been torn away and never returned? He lived alone. He didn't remarry, he didn't have more children. He worked at the county library, a quiet job where he could escape the noise of the outside world, alone with old newspapers, archives, and memories no one wanted to touch. Until one March morning in 2023, 31 years after the disappearance, a call from the Los Angeles police broke his decades-long silence. "We need you to come see something," the voice said cautiously. "We're not sure, but you should come." It was a red backpack, rotted by time, found by workers dismantling an old warehouse on the northern edge of Universal, once a storage hub for outdated props, abandoned since the late 90s. While removing the tin roof and scaffolding, a worker named Ben Tapia spotted it wedged between two beams, high up, almost deliberately hidden. The backpack was old, dust-covered, with a rusted zipper. But inside were remnants, a child's drawing of a figure next to Frankenstein, with Logan plus Lucas written in marker. A faded piece of an E.T. shirt with a strand of black hair. A 1992 Universal Studios admission ticket, yellowed and torn at the edges. And at the bottom, a note folded in quarters, with two handwritten words, "Help US." Daniel saw the backpack sealed in a nylon bag, placed on the new investigation team's meeting table. His throat tightened. There was no mistake. It was one of the backpacks he'd bought. The small scratch on the right strap, from Lucas falling at school, was still there. He couldn't breathe. Pain surged, like a silent but ferocious wave, crashing into his chest after more than 3 decades. Investigators followed the new evidence, reopening the old file. They found the warehouse where the backpack was discovered was near an old technical exit, sealed in 1995, but previously used to move large props to outside containers. No cameras were there, no direct oversight. The steel door was rusted, the lock long broken. Who brought the backpack there, and why was it hidden high up, not discarded like trash? Who climbed up there? Who knew a place no one would look? Who had the time and calm to leave a silent plea for help in the heart of entertainment's hell, then vanish? That question began haunting the new investigation team, as it had haunted Daniel for 31 years. But this time, he wasn't alone. The red backpack, a final symbol of unfinished dreams, returned like a wordless voice from 2 boys never found. The red backpack wasn't just physical evidence, it was an invisible key, unlocking a door sealed for over 30 years. The next day, case UHAD EO 19920-717 was officially reopened, marked as cold case reactivated. But in the 31 years since, most original investigators had retired, changed careers, or passed away. The only person who remembered every detail of the twins' disappearance at Universal wasn't law enforcement. It was Daniel Chen. Over 3 decades, Daniel wasn't just a grieving father, he kept the investigation's flame burning quietly in the dark, when all authorities gave up. After refusing to sign the unresolved missing conclusion, he learned to read legal files, access court libraries, study police internal reporting systems, and even taught himself computers and the internet from 2000 to find more clues. In his cramped El Monte bedroom, he built a self-run investigation center, walls covered with universal maps over the years, lists of employees working in July 1992, names of those fired without clear reasons, internal rumors from amusement park fan forums, and photos of people cosplaying Frankenstein downloaded from outdated websites. He marked faces, names, and trivial history in red pen, most of it blurred by time. He repeatedly wrote to Universal for access to personnel records from that period, but was always denied for confidentiality reasons. Once, he posed as a pop culture researcher to access public archives, but only found altered stage blueprints. Every year, he wrote to the police requesting a reinvestigation. Every year, the response was the same: no new data. Case does not qualify for review, but he didn't give up. And now, with the backpack's discovery, he was finally not alone. The 2023 Special Investigations Unit was led by Detective Maria Alvarez, who had worked on numerous missing children cases in California. Alvarez was cautious and rational, but reading Daniel's years of personal notes, she couldn't hide her astonishment. "All of this? You did this alone?" she asked at their first meeting. Daniel just nodded. On the table were his hand-labeled files: Frankenstein afternoon shift employees, North technical exit, prop hiding, gift shop, who sold defective keychains. List of people fired without reason, late 1992. Alvarez saw what no one had before, a staggering amount of data collected with heartbreaking patience. "We'll start here," she said. The Special Investigations Team worked with forensic reconstruction experts, digital tracing specialists, and the FBI. With modern technology, they could rescan VHS data, enhance resolution, and use AI to denoise and sharpen details from old tapes. A video analyst named Cam said, "If something made it into the frame, even just an arm in a corner, we can identify it now." They also accessed the National DNA Database, comparing hair strands from the backpack to profiles nationwide. Results confirmed not one but two hairs belonged to young boys, matching DNA from Logan and Lucas, provided by Daniel from hairs in an old family scrapbook. There was no doubt the backpack was with the boys during their disappearance. But that also meant something colder. Someone had kept it for 3 decades before leaving it in the prop warehouse. Who was that person? Why wait until now? And why hide it so carefully that only a demolition accident revealed it? That question became the investigation's core, and for the first time in 31 years, Daniel joined, not as a witness, but as a partner, a scribe, a keeper of memories, the one who kept the fire burning while the world tried to forget 2 boys named Logan and Lucas. The discovery of the backpack not only reopened the Logan and Lucas Chen case after more than 3 decades, but also shook Universal Studios internally, a company long proud of its stringent security protocols and perfect cinematic world image. The truth was, the warehouse where the backpack was found wasn't on the park's current operational map. It was an auxiliary structure, used in the 1980s to store props and lighting equipment, abandoned when technical operations shifted to a modern facility in 1996. Since then, the warehouse was sealed, its roll-up door rusted, with no official entry, but its roof still connected to a scaffolding system behind an old stage. And it was in a small crevice, 4 meters up on a wooden beam, amid cobwebs, rotting wood, and steel dust, that the red backpack was found. Crime scene technicians confirmed there was no way the backpack fell into place. Someone deliberately hid it, intentionally placed in a high, out-of-sight spot, almost a calculated act. Forensic experts examined the dust on the zipper, the oxidation on the keychain, and determined the backpack was placed there relatively recently, about 5 to 7 years ago. This stunned the entire investigation team. If Logan and Lucas vanished in 1992, why wasn't the backpack hidden then, but instead placed in the warehouse between 2015 and 2018? Someone, for some reason, had kept the backpack for over 20 years, then hid it. And more crucially, why in a place once part of Universal Studios? Who had access? Who had reason to return to an unused warehouse? Who had the time to climb the steel scaffolding and leave such silent evidence? Detective Maria Alvarez ordered a review of all employees who worked at Universal from 1990 to 2020, including those fired, transferred, retired, or who quit without reason. It was a list of over 1,500 names. Of those, only 43 had worked in stage technical operations, the group with access to the old warehouse through backstage routes before it was sealed in 1996. And of those 43, only 6 were still living in the Los Angeles area, including one name that appeared in a 1992 internal termination file, but was never questioned by the FBI. Norman Dwight Hayes. He had been a wardrobe assistant in the Classic Monsters area, specifically tasked with maintaining and supervising Frankenstein costumes. Hayes was fired in November 1992, 4 months after the disappearance. The reason listed: violation of scheduling rules, inappropriate interaction with minor guests, but no criminal charges were filed. No police notification was made. At the time, the park issued an internal warning, then quietly let him go. When Daniel heard the name, he sat motionless for minutes. "I've seen his name before, in notes I kept from a cosplay fan forum," he said. Then dug through his old documents, pulling out a yellowed paper, a 1991 photo with the caption, "Dwight, best Frankenstein ever." Spiky hair, a sideways glance, a slouched posture. It was the man who stood beside his boys in their final photo. Alvarez ordered verification of Hayes' latest address. He was living in a trailer park nearly 40 miles from Hollywood, in a semi-rural area called Val Verde, once undeveloped land in the 1992 expansion map. Police approached him quietly. Hayes, now a 64-year-old loner, lived alone, with no family, surviving on Social Security and odd jobs. When questioned about the disappearance, he gave a dry laugh, his sunken eyes glinting. "I wore the Frankenstein costume every day. Who remembers which kid was which?" But when investigators showed him the red backpack and the Help US note, his hand shook. The calluses of time couldn't hide the slight twitch in his right thumb. Police couldn't arrest him yet. There was no direct evidence. But Alvarez looked at Daniel and nodded slightly. "We've touched the monster's shell." For the first time in 31 years, Daniel Chen felt he wasn't walking in the dark alone, and for the first time, what he called hope was no longer an illusion. It was perched on a warehouse rafter, in the form of an old backpack someone had tried to bury for a lifetime. When forensic experts analyzed the faded fabric from the backpack under ultraviolet light, everyone held their breath. It wasn't just a piece of the ET shirt Lucas had worn, confirmed by Daniel, from a small embroidered detail at the wrist. On the fabric, fused by time and dust, was a dark brown stain, nearly invisible to the naked eye. A sample was sent to the FBI lab. After nearly a month, the DNA results came back in a sealed envelope, human blood, matching Logan Chen's genetic profile. Daniel sat silently in the office, holding the envelope like it was his son's last relic. He didn't cry, he didn't scream, he just opened each page, reading and rereading until the words lost meaning. That piece of fabric, a small part of a memory he thought had rotted away, now proved the worst fear he'd tried not to believe. His boys had bled while still alive. Alvarez placed a hand on his shoulder, saying nothing. They didn't need to name the pain anymore. It had been there all along. But if the fabric was evidence Logan was injured, why was it in the backpack? And why was the backpack kept for over 20 years before being hidden? In the 1992 investigation, a theory suggested the perpetrator took the boys out through the north technical exit near the classic monsters stage. Now the fabric and backpack made that theory more than speculation. They proved the boys were held somewhere, at least for hours, before vanishing completely. Investigator Cam, tasked with analyzing photos and videos, reviewed VHS footage from a distant camera that captured the prop transport area. Late afternoon on July 17, 1992. The images were blurry, noisy, and slow-moving. But after technical processing with image reconstruction software, they found something odd. At 5:52 p.m. A white van with no license plate left the North Technical Warehouse area. During a moment, the entire park was distracted by a sound system malfunction. That van was never logged in Universal's operations records. No one identified the driver, but a clipped frame showed a tall, broad-shouldered figure moving heavily, with a slight limp and slower left-hand movements. Daniel recognized it instantly. "It's him," he said. "It's Frankenstein." Police began tracing Norman Dwight Hayes' entire activity and movement history from 1992 to 2015. The estimated period when the backpack was placed in the warehouse. Over those years, Hayes had lived in 3 different states, but always returned to Los Angeles every July. Police also found in Hayes' medical records a 2002 hospitalization for a dog bite on his left hand, causing muscle damage that noticeably weakened its movement. This matched the 1992 witness description of a Frankenstein with unusual movements, left hand nearly immobile. A criminal psychologist was brought in to evaluate Hayes' behavioral profile. She concluded, "He's not an impulsive killer, he's an obsessive-compulsive, controlling, organized type. If he's the perpetrator, he kept part of the crime with him for years, like a perverse trophy. And at some point, he couldn't bear it. He wanted to hide it, but couldn't destroy it." Placing the backpack on the warehouse rafter wasn't just concealment. It was a silent confession. A strange way to force someone to look back. But why? Conscience or fear? Police re-interviewed Hayes. This time they didn't bring photos, mention Frankenstein, or reference Logan or Lucas. They just placed the backpack in front of him and sat silently. He stared at it for a long time, his left finger twitching slightly. Then in a raspy voice like dry sand, he asked, "Does he still keep the pictures of those 2 kids?" Alvarez responded, "Who keeps them?" He didn't answer. He just looked out the window where afternoon sunlight filtered through trees, casting faint shadows on the floor like memories that wouldn't fade. And in that moment Daniel, standing behind the one-way glass, realized the nightmare was about to get an answer. But what it brought might be more horrific than anything he'd ever imagined. That night, after the hauntingly silent interrogation, Alvarez returned to the investigation office near midnight. On the table, Cam, the video analyst, was opening an old text file from a floppy disk stored in the archive. "Look at this name," he said. Alvarez leaned in. The text, typed in old courier font, read, Ari Henderson. Withdrawn from costume training, July 13, 1992. No re-entry permitted. Her eyes flickered. Henderson, Norman Dwight Hayes, doesn't have an R initial. "No," Cam replied. "Henderson isn't him. It's someone else. Removed from costume training, just 4 days before the disappearance." The data was in a disciplinary archive folder, never transferred to modern digital records. A faded handwritten note added, "Unsuitable for work near children, abnormal communication," and the full name, Richard Henderson, never mentioned in any investigation reports. Never questioned, the 1992 police didn't know he existed. Because he was never officially employed by Universal. He was a volunteer intern, an unpaid role requiring no contract or official employee ID. The system then didn't mandate personal records for such positions. Without the handwritten note from a retired manager, Henderson might have been forgotten forever. Alvarez called Daniel the next morning. She sat him across from a screen displaying the only record of Henderson, a scanned volunteer registration, scrawled handwriting, signed in red ink, or Henderson. Enjoys costuming, studied performing arts. "Have you ever heard this name?" Daniel froze. He leaned back, as if pushed by a memory he couldn't yet name. Slowly, he pulled from his pocket the old Kodak photo he'd carried for 31 years. Logan and Lucas with Frankenstein. I don't remember his face clearly, but his left hand was always stiff, and he didn't seem like an actor. Alvarez nodded. The team began tracing. It wasn't easy. Richard Henderson was a common name. But after 3 days of digging through tax records, medical files, church registries, homeless shelter logs, and Universal's old volunteer applications, they found a match. Richard Boyd Henderson, born 1966 in Riverside County, California. His history was fragmented. No tax filings after 1994. No valid driver's license. No fixed address for 2 decades. But a 2003 medical report showed Henderson admitted to a psychiatric hospital in Bakersfield, diagnosed with severe obsessive-compulsive disorder with intermittent paranoia. Then, he vanished. Police traced him through Social Security records and finally located him, living in a dilapidated wooden cabin in San Bernardino, 100 kilometers from Universal. With no electricity, no running water, no formal lease. The property belonged to a relative who died in 2017. A search warrant was approved within 12 hours. Local police and federal investigators arrived at 6 a.m. They found a gaunt, white-haired man with spiky hair sitting in a corner, amid trash and scrawled drawings covering the walls. All depicted children. Some had distortedly large eyes, wearing Universal character hats. A few showed 2 boys in ET shirts, and one phrase was repeated on the walls. "They talked to me. They never left." In a locked steel cabinet, police found a discolored Frankenstein headpiece and a costume with stitching repairs on the left shoulder, and on the floor, a rusted tin box. Inside, 2 unprocessed Kodak film rolls and a note reading, "Backstage area no one visits, under technical floor, stay silent." Cam rushed the film to a photo lab. After 3 hours, the images emerged. Blurry, shaky, but unmistakable, 2 bound twin boys' mouths taped, in an unplastered brick room, lit by a slanted technical light. A figure stood behind, half their face in a Frankenstein mask. Daniel looked at the photos. He couldn't speak. His hands trembled, but his eyes didn't leave the image. For the first time in 31 years, he saw his son's final moments, not through memory, not through guilt, but in stark reality. Police arrested Richard Henderson on charges of kidnapping, unlawful detention, causing injury, and suspected first-degree murder. But the case wasn't over. Because Henderson, when questioned, said only one thing: "I wasn't the only one who kept them." And with that, the case shifted again. A forgotten man had named a name, but that name never existed in the records, and that was what made seasoned investigators more afraid than anything else. As the San Bernardino desert sun reached its peak, casting light on the warped tin roof of the wooden cabin, a federal security vehicle quietly left with Richard Henderson handcuffed in the back. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just tilted his head to the sunlight, his cloudy eyes accustomed to a lifetime in the dark. At a temporary federal interrogation center in Riverside, a soundproof room was cleared, lit with soft white light. 2 cameras positioned opposite, and a one-way glass. Daniel stood behind that glass, heart pounding like a drum, while inside, Alvarez sat across from Henderson, the man who'd vanished from records for over 3 decades, but held film rolls no one had seen. Alvarez didn't rush. She placed a thin file on the table. The backpack, the blood-stained fabric, the photo of the bound twins. "Who are you in this story, Henderson?" she asked. He looked at her, silent. His eyes remained cloudy, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "I'm the one in the middle," he whispered. "Not the one who took, not the one who let go. Just the keeper." His answer was like a dull knife, not clear, not definitive, but chilling everyone in the room. Alvarez shifted her approach. "Where did you keep them? Was anyone else involved?" He tilted his head, as if hearing a voice not from the room. "They spoke at night," said the other guy. "He never left. He's still there, under the floor, behind the cables, where no one hears." "Who's the other guy?" Alvarez pressed. "What's his name?" Henderson raised a hand, scratched his chin lightly, then whispered, "I called him the shift changer." No one knew what the shift changer meant, but from that moment, the case was no longer about a lone disturbed man. It became something more tangled, layered, and terrifying. If Henderson was just the keeper, who was the taker? Who moved through Universal Studios in 1992 without leaving a trace? And why, after over 30 years, did he still terrify a disturbed man like Henderson enough to avoid naming him? Daniel, leaving the observation room, told Alvarez, "I believe him. Part of it." "Which part?" "That he wasn't the only one." An urgent sweep of Universal's old basement schematics was ordered. They found a 1985 blueprint showing an 80-meter technical corridor linking the old prop warehouse to a secluded area behind the soundstage, sealed in 1997, during the park's restructuring. No one had checked it since concrete was poured over it for the new Jurassic Park area. A forensic team was dispatched. They drilled exploratory holes. A pipe camera was threaded through a small opening into the pitch-black void below. The screen revealed a circular concrete room, rough walls, with old tape residue, rotted rope, and a rusted metal chair on the floor, like a sacrificial altar. They broke the concrete, opening the passage. No bodies were found, but there were traces of dried blood, incompletely cleaned, large shoe prints, and a series of scrawled symbols on the walls, smiley faces with hollow eyes, and crossed-out mouths. Daniel stepped into the room after 31 years of searching. He stood silently amid the cold gray walls, looking up at a dangling misaligned ceiling bulb. "They were here," he said softly. "I can feel it." Henderson remained silent in detention, but at every meal, he repeated one phrase: "He'll know I talked, and he won't let it go." After nearly a month, the FBI officially classified the Logan and Lucas Chen case as missing, suspected organized crime, ongoing offense. Alvarez knew they weren't just facing a disturbed man. It could be a small hidden system operating for years, within the entertainment corridors, behind costumes and stage lights. A shadow living in the gap between real and unreal, that Henderson, in his deranged way, had tried to point to. But the critical question remained unanswered. Were the boys still alive? And if so, where had they been kept for 30 years? Beneath technical floors, or in another hell people innocently called an amusement park? And the shift changer, who was he, and where was he waiting for his next turn? 6 weeks after the excavation of the sealed technical basement room, the investigation entered its most intense and strangest phase. No bodies, no signs of human decomposition, no DNA sufficient to confirm a murder took place there. But the obsession was everywhere. Strips of adhesive tape stuck to the stone floor, tiny strands of hair in concrete crevices, and the crossed-out smiley-face drawings all screamed that something unimaginable had happened here. And just when everything seemed to hit a dead end, Richard Henderson, who had remained silent since his arrest, suddenly requested to meet Daniel Chen alone. At first, Alvarez fiercely objected. He could manipulate, he could fabricate, he could be pulling you into another sick game. But Daniel sat quietly in the interrogation office, looked her in the eye, and said only one thing: "I've walked for 31 years, I'm not afraid of 30 more minutes." The meeting took place early in the morning, in a temporary federal holding cell in Riverside, with cameras recording, one-way glass, but no investigator interference during the conversation. Henderson entered with his hands cuffed in front, barefoot, his oversized prison jumpsuit making him look like a disoriented ghost. Daniel said nothing. He sat straight-backed, hands on the table, waiting. Henderson sat down. He sighed. For the first time in 30 years, the two men faced each other, one a father, the other a keeper of distorted memories. "I didn't kill them," Henderson began. His voice low, trembling. "I swear," was just the keeper. Daniel narrowed his eyes, leaning forward. "Kept what?" "Kept time," he replied. "Kept them from knowing their childhood was being taken. I let them play. I didn't hurt them, I swear. But where are my boys? I don't know anymore." After the third month, he came. "He told me not to come back." "Who's he?" "I never knew his real name. He wore a technician's uniform. His keys opened every door. He didn't look anyone in the eye. But the kids were scared of him. Once, I heard Logan say, 'Frankenstein doesn't hurt me. But the other guy does.'" Daniel clenched his fists, forcing out each word. "Where did he take my boys?" Henderson shook his head, his eyes twitching. "I don't know. I was pushed out. I left Universal in October. I took the backpack because I couldn't stand the smell of blood. I meant to tell the police, but I knew no one would believe me. So I kept it. Kept it like I was keeping part of the guilt. And for 30 years you told no one. I was haunted. I heard their voices at night. They didn't blame me. But they called. They didn't want to be forgotten." Daniel lowered his head. For the first time in the room, his throat trembled. "Do you know what the worst thing is?" he asked. "It's not losing them. It's losing them. And no one believing they ever existed." Henderson nodded, lips pursed. He offered one final thing, a piece of paper, folded multiple times, stained yellowed. "I found it in Lucas's jacket pocket. No one knew I kept it. I didn't dare show anyone." Daniel opened it. In shaky, scrawled handwriting. "We're scared. Someone said they'd take our eyes. I don't want to sleep. If anyone reads this, please get us out of here. Lucas." Henderson broke down. Not a wail, but a wet, silent sound, spilling from the rusted depths of a mind that had known something too horrific, and chosen to hide it with absolute silence. Henderson was formally charged with unlawful detention, possession of evidence, concealing a serious crime, and complicity in a child disappearance. But with his testimony and evidence, murder charges were deferred, because there were no bodies. Alvarez, after that interrogation, met Daniel in the parking lot behind the station. The afternoon sun fell on her cap, casting a golden glow on his silvered hair. "I know you want a clear ending, but without bodies, I can't declare them dead." Daniel nodded. "I don't need that declaration. I just need to know if someone's still alive, or still hurting. I have to keep going." That night, Daniel sat alone on the balcony of a rented motel near the Santa Ana River, where he stayed during the investigation. He watched the glowing lines of cars and recalled Logan's gap-toothed smile on the roller coaster, Lucas's giggles calling him frizzy-haired professor. He had no grave to visit, no ashes to bring home, no death certificate to file away. But he had a letter, a piece of faded fabric, a film roll, and a man who confessed to guarding his sons for 3 months in the dark. Maybe the truth was still under another layer of concrete, or inside a room no one had opened. But one thing was certain. Logan and Lucas Chen's story was finally heard, and in this noisy world, being heard was the first form of justice. Alvarez sat in the Monday morning meeting room, where sunlight slanted through frosted glass, casting shadows on a board filled with photos, diagrams, and red lines connecting the scattered pieces of a 3-decade case. At the center were 2 photos, Logan and Lucas Chen, bright black eyes, short hair, faded ET shirts, and beside them, a close-up of Richard Henderson at his arrest. But now, a new name emerged from the thin layer Henderson had inadvertently exposed, Morris Delaney, a seasonal sound engineer who worked at Universal from June to November 1992. The name wasn't in official employee records, wasn't investigated back then, but surfaced from scrawled text on the back of the paper Henderson gave Daniel. DM said today he'd take them below. At first, no one knew who DM was, until a young investigator cross-checked the 1992 subcontractor list and found a record for Delaney Morris with a temporary sound engineering license issued by a defunct subcontractor in 1994. Everything collapsed again. Morris Delaney, a man no one mentioned, questioned, or tracked for 3 decades, suddenly became the final piece. A relentless manhunt began. Delaney had no criminal record, no behavioral complaints, but strangely, From 1993 onward, he had no Social Security registration, no tax filings, no property transactions, no valid driver's license, no social media. He had vanished from America. The only trace was an old address. A rotting wooden house on the edge of Yucca Valley, once owned by his deceased aunt, repossessed by a bank in 2003. The team, reviewing anonymous tips to the Logan Lucas hotline from 1998, 2002, found a strange call, a trembling male voice saying, "They're still down there but not dead. You don't understand. There are things worse than death." It was dismissed as a prank then, but now, it chilled everyone, because it echoed what Henderson whispered, "I didn't kill them, but I think they were never allowed to die." The focus shifted to Yucca Valley. The wooden house was barely intact, but beneath the floor, through broken bricks, was a narrow tunnel, less than 10 meters long, leading to a 12 square meters concrete room with no windows. Inside, pitch black. Flashlights revealed swirling dust, and in the center, a torn brown leather chair, chained to the floor, surrounded by hundreds of old photos scattered on the ground. All of children, not just Logan and Lucas, but dozens of others, seemingly from amusement parks across America. One photo stopped Daniel's breath. Lucas sitting on the chair, face crumpled, a technical light shining in his eyes, with a tall shadow half hidden in the corner. Clearly not Henderson. Image analysis showed the photo was developed from German film, rare in the US, with an expiration date of 1997, meaning it could have been taken 4-5 years after the disappearance. If true, Lucas, or both boys, may have been held for years before vanishing completely, and someone, possibly Morris Delaney, had built a system of tunnels, locks, lighting and cameras to capture fear. This wasn't a kidnapping, it was a meticulously designed ecosystem of torment. Henderson wasn't the only one. He was just the gatekeeper. The true manipulator of the dark was Delaney. But where was he? The only trace was a 2012 gas receipt, paid in cash at a station near the New Mexico border, signed MD. Investigators knew he was alive. And worse, he might still be active. Alvarez sat alone in her car, staring at a laptop screen, showing photos of unidentified children in dim light. "We didn't find bodies," she said over the radio. "But we've seen hell, and if we don't take another step, that hell will open again for the next child." Daniel sat outside the bunker, afternoon sunlight on his weathered face. His trembling hands held an old photo, not of Logan or Lucas, but of an 8-year-old girl in a princess costume, eyes hollow, with a vibrant Universal stage backdrop from 1996. "This," he muttered, "is bigger than me. Bigger than my boys. It's a machine that devours memories," and he knew he couldn't turn back. Not when forgotten children still had no burial, not when the truth hid beneath dazzling costumes, like a play that never ends. Not when there were things worse than death. That morning, a light breeze stirred the palm trees outside Universal Studios' main gate, making white ribbons tied for the Forgotten Children search campaign flutter against the iron fence. A crowd gathered outside, many holding photos of their children, missing since the 80s-90s, faces faded by time, but never erased from the minds of those left to remember. Daniel stood quietly at a distance. He held no photo, no sign. He just kept his hands in his coat pockets, clutching Lucas's note, the desperate plea from 30 years ago, when his son could only entrust hope to a crumpled paper in a blood-stained pocket. After everything, he didn't need justice, he needed truth. And the truth, ultimately, lay in a place built to deceive emotions, an amusement park. When the FBI released its preliminary conclusion, Richard Henderson held the boys for 3 months in Universal's technical basement before handing them to an unidentified individual, referred to as Morris Delaney. No one involved was surprised anymore. The horror had given way to numbness, the kind that comes when the nightmare you feared turns out to be real. The investigation shifted from identifying a single criminal to peeling back layers of covert operations thriving quietly within major amusement parks. Rooms, not on blueprints, staff not in records, tunnels built under the guise of sound engineering, but actually uncontrolled. And worst, a system of trust exploited, where parents willingly let their children pose with anyone in a cartoon costume. Morris Delaney wasn't the only name. He was a link to patterns at 7 major amusement parks. Children vanishing under unusual circumstances. Seasonal staff disappearing post-incident. Cameras failing at critical moments. Thin threads formed a jagged map. But as the investigation machine churned, the sun still rose every morning over Universal's gates. Kids still lined up for Minion photos. Families crowded into haunted houses. Blockbuster soundtracks blared across the central plaza. Nothing changed. That was what horrified Daniel most. "The machine keeps running," he told Alvarez during a walk past the park's backstage area. "Even when we find its gears stained with blood, it keeps running." Alvarez didn't disagree. She just furrowed her brow, looking at the electrical cables along the ceiling, thinking of unopened rooms. "Some things we'll never find," she said. "But some things, once known, we can't pretend to forget." Henderson died after his third hearing. He took his life by swallowing a metal shank from his prison shoe sole. No one noticed in time. His suicide note had 2 lines. "I don't deserve to say sorry, but I hope they felt the sky, even in dreams." Daniel didn't keep that note. He said, "He doesn't get the last word." But he kept something else. A VHS tape, found in the Yucca Valley bunker. In it, Lucas softly sang an English nursery rhyme, eyes looking up, lips trembling. Logan sat with his back turned, clutching a stuffed doll's fake braid. No one smiled. No one spoke. No one forced them to do anything. It was the strangest moment Daniel had ever seen, at the edge of pain. 2 children still tried to live as children. That's when he understood. He wasn't seeking justice for himself, but to tell the world they existed. They feared, they hoped, and they waited for rescue. In September 2024, a memorial garden was built by Universal Studios' north wall, where the old technical exit stood, the spot where the white van left on that fateful afternoon in 1992. The garden had no monument, no plaque, just a small stone path lined with lavender and weeping willows. At its center, a single wooden bench bore the inscription, "Some things don't disappear, they wait." Every July 17th, Daniel sat on that bench. He brought 2 white flowers, placed them on the ground, said nothing, just sat there, so his boys, if still somewhere in this world, knew someone was waiting. The Logan and Lucas Chen story was added to the Justice Department's Child Disappearance and Exploitation Awareness Program as a landmark case study on amusement park disappearances. It spurred sweeping security, tracking and personnel screening reforms. Facial recognition systems were upgraded. Costume staff were required to wear GPS-tracked IDs. Technical passages were double-sealed and constantly monitored. Nothing was too late. Every action, every reform, was a way to tell Logan and Lucas, whether alive or not, that death wasn't the only thing worth being remembered for. And as long as the sun rose over Universal's gates, people would walk through, holding their children's hands, hearts tightening at the sound of laughter amid costumes. Not because they were afraid, but because they knew behind the magic there was always darkness, and not everyone returned from it. But Daniel believed, with an old, painful faith, that as long as you didn't turn away there was always hope. And he kept waiting, in the sunlight, on the wooden bench, in a garden no one advertised, because some things, if you no longer dare to tell, will happen again. And not every child gets to write a final plea in their pocket. The story of twins Logan and Lucas Chen is not just a family tragedy, but a profound warning to modern American society about security gaps in public spaces, especially places deemed absolutely safe, like amusement parks. In this disappearance, blind trust in